Who are Koul and Tadg, and what is the Battle of Cumhaill, which leads to the birth of Fionn mac Koul? This video will argue that the Vedic myth of Prajapati violating and impregnating his own daughter, ultimately resulting in the birth of Mahadeva Rudra, is actually from the same root as the Irish Koul stealing and impregnating the daughter of Tadg, resulting in Fionn, the Irish Rudra. As usual with my videos, this is a direct statement of what I see intended to quickly communicate the parallel, and a more detailed actual argument will be given in the eventual book chapter. Sometimes myths stayed shockingly the same between the different branches, and other times elements inverted even more shockingly. Because of this, not every right answer in comparative mythology actually has the most evidence to plainly paint the picture for it. Yet it remains the right answer. We don't have a choice in what the right answer is and how much data survived for it, but we still have to find it, or have to try. We have to have a model and a method that accounts for the reality of the situation, that sometimes the correct answer has only a limited number of clues surviving in its favor, against a larger set of attractive but ultimately misleading data points supporting the alternative. Sometimes a couple of fragments seen in the right light are the only clues to the true solution, while a wrong solution to the same problem offers itself with a multitude of seemingly aligned facts, what can be considered mirages. Mirages with the stamp of expertise are worth less than nothing, and are in fact dangerous to progressing further in understanding. See the Yemo and Manus reconstruction, which will go down as probably the most famous case. In context of the topic of this video, we may here be looking for the match of the Vedic creation myth, Prajapati-type father god violates and impregnates his own daughter, and we may find in another branch, such as the Irish, that father god does not violate his daughter and instead tries unsuccessfully to keep her from marriage, is the story that actually comes from the shared root with the Vedic daughter violation myth. If this drastic variation is what actually happened in the history of the transmission of these stories, then we must absolutely have a method that is capable of dealing with it. We cannot be hamstrung by a model that only can accept direct and obvious matches. We must be able to accept anything that has happened as long as we can understand something about how it happened. And we must be prepared for anything to have happened. In this case, the transformation is not really so complicated to theorize about, though it is admittedly counterintuitive. In the Irish story, the cause of the Battle of Cumhaill, a different figure, Koul, takes away the daughter of Tadg, named Muirne. Tadg and his own father Nuada are apparently trying to keep Muirne from Koul, as Nuada fears Koul will displace him from his stronghold on the sacred hill Alvu. Odd, because 2 paragraphs before this in the text of the cause of the Battle of Cumhaill, it had stated that death had come to Nuada, so this may either be a textual mix-up or he is on his deathbed here. Now Alvu is also the name of Nuada's wife, and the stronghold of the sacred hill at Alvu is said to be rubbed with lime until it turns all white. Matching this to the Norse sacred tree and also Axis Mundi, Yggdrasil, which is rubbed with water that turns it white by the Norns, it is clear that we are at the very Axis Mundi here, the sacred hill and sacred tree being symbolically interchangeable as standing for the Axis Mundi. Koul, taking the daughter of Tadg, threatens to displace the high druid sovereign of the gods, Nuada, and his son Tadg from his place at the sacred center. But Koul ultimately does so, the text specifying that he takes Muirne by force as she was not given to him. Tadg asks Conn for help, who then enlists Gaul mac Morna to bring his army against Koul. Gaul kills Koul, and Muirne is found to be pregnant. She is sent to the house of the druid Bomo, sister of Koul. She gives birth to Jevnia, who grows into Fionn or Fionn mac Koul. In some versions, Bomo has to take Jevnia into the woods to hide him in a tree, fearing for good reason that Tadg will have him killed. When Jevnia, who afterwards is Fionn, gets old enough, he returns to Tadg and demands the fortress of Almhu from him as compensation, Eric, and hereditary inheritance. Tadg responds by ceding the fortress to Fionn, which he makes his stronghold. The newborn Rudra has taken the Axis Mundi. Now let's try to walk through why and how this is actually the same story from the same root as the story of Prajapati having sexual relations with and impregnating his own daughter, even though in this story, the father, Tadg, does almost the exact opposite thing, trying to keep his daughter from being forcefully taken and impregnated. For those who follow my work, they might wonder why Koul wouldn't instead be like Gaulav, father of Averfin, in the Book of Invasions. That is, the Manu/Kama type. Or perhaps why Koul himself wouldn't be the Prajapati type here, since he impregnates the daughter. Or why this myth couldn't be anything else. It is not any of these alternatives which don't quite fit. First, to lay some groundwork. The key to beginning to see what happened is this: the Vratya variant of Prajapati's procreation myth or birth of Rudra myth found in Atharva Veda 15. In some versions of Prajapati's myth, he simply copulates with his daughter, for instance in the form of an antelope, and then Rudra shoots him during the act to try to stop it. Rudra fails, and the son that eventually comes from this is the reborn child Rudra, Kumara or Mahadeva. Rudra may or may not be born directly to Prajapati in these other variants, or Prajapati has as his son Manu, who transforms into Rudra. Quote, Prajapati thought of cohabiting with his own daughter, whom some call Heaven, others Dawn, Ushas. He transformed himself into a buck or a kind of deer, Risya, whilst his daughter assumed the shape of a female deer, Rohit. He approached her. The gods saw it, crying, Prajapati commits an act never done before. In order to avert the evil consequences of this incestuous act, the gods inquired for someone who might destroy the evil consequences of it. Among themselves, they did not find anyone who might do that, atone for Prajapati's crime. They then put the most fearful bodies, for the gods have many bodies of theirs, in one. This aggregate of the most fearful bodies of the gods became a god, Bhutavan, i.e. Rudra, by name. For he who knows this name only is born. The gods said to him, Prajapati has committed an act which he ought not to have committed. Pierce this, the incarnation of his evil deed. So he did. He then said, I will choose a boon from you. They said, Choose. He then chose as his boon sovereignty over cattle. That is the reason that his name is Pashuman, i.e. having cattle. Compare to Pashupati. He who knows on this earth only this name, Pashuman, becomes rich in cattle. He, Bhutavan, attacked him, the incarnation of Prajapati's evil deed, and pierced him with an arrow. Unquote. In Kausataki Brahmana 6.1, quote, Prajapati took to himself the sperm of his own sons. He held it in a vessel of gold, the incorruptible, immortal substance. Prajapati carried this precious bowl as if it were his womb, and he became the parent of the archer who holds 1,000 arrows. Immediately, the overpowering figure of this newborn god grasps his father and demands to be given a name. Kausutaki Brahmana 6.2. He aims at his father, Prajapati, who asks him, "Why do you shoot at me?" The newborn one demands, "Give me a name. Without having a name, I shall not eat food here." What food in the world will sustain this avid being of 1,000 eyes and 1,000 feet, unless it be this entire world? The hunger of Rudra, newly born, is that of existence. He aims at his father and does not let him go until he has been given by him the 8th name. He held him in his power until he, eating the food he desires, assuming the forms he desires, receives name after name. When his indwelling power was confirmed by each new name, only then did he relax his hold. He has received his identity and sustenance. He was relentless in his demand and hunger to assimilate, to convert into his own being, to take into himself the entire creation." Unquote. Quote, "Prajapati conceived a passion for his own daughter, either the sky or the dawn. 'May I pair with her?' Thus thinking, he united with her. This assuredly was a sin in the eyes of the gods. 'He who acts thus toward his own daughter, our sister, commits a sin,' they thought. The gods then said to this god who rules over the beasts, Rudra, 'This one surely commits a sin who acts thus towards his own daughter, our sister. Pierce him!' Rudra, taking aim, pierced him. Half of his seed fell to the ground, and thus it came to pass. Accordingly, it has been said by the Rishi with reference to that incident, 'When the father embraced his daughter, uniting with her, he dropped his seed on the earth.' This became the chant called Agni Maruta. In connection with this, it is set forth how the gods caused that seed to spring." Unquote. From Shatapatha Brahmana 1.7.4.1 through 4. Quote, "Prajapati, as the householder, with Ushas, Dawn, as his wife, held a sacrificial session for a year. The Lord of Generation, Prajapati, shed seed into Ushas. In a year, a boy, Kumara, was born. He cried." See Shatapatha Brahmana 6.1.3.7 through 8. A human, homely atmosphere has spread over the primal scene, that violent rape of Dawn, the father's daughter." Unquote. Prajapati being the totality himself, his daughter is understood to be part of Prajapati. So, Prajapati is paradoxically copulating with the feminine aspect of his own godhead, when he, quote-unquote, copulates with his daughter. In the Atharva Veda version, however, Prajapati is not alone. He is approached here by a wandering Vratya. The Vratyas, in short, make the Vedic parallel of the Fionn of Ireland. Vedic chiefs would seasonally exchange their Vratyas with other chiefs, reminiscent of the moving around of bands of Fionn to different kings. They tended toward ecstatic esotericism and asceticism, and had a place on the fringe of society. They were referred to as dog priests. Quote, "They were clad in black fringed garments. The black color distinguished their attire, as it did that of Rudra when he appeared on the site of the sacrifice by the Angirases. The Vratyas wore a turban and carried lance and bow." Atharva Veda 15.2.1. Their name is derived from Vrata, a host, which in turn may be derived from Vrata, a vow or observance of a sacred ordinance. In the Satarudriya hymn to the 100 forms and powers of Rudra, the leaders of hosts, Vratapati, Taittiriya Samhita 4.5.4.1, are invoked." Unquote. Chris Kershaw's book, The One-Eyed God, Odin and the Indo-Germanic Mannerbund, makes a definitive case that the Vratyas held the position comparable to the Kourios bands in the West, despite the Vratyas having a stronger ascetic or priestly bent in the Indian context. So, as a parallel of the Fionn members, the Vratya is another name for a Rudra-type figure. This becomes clear because this Vratya, the hymn says, makes Prajapati find the gold within himself and then engender it. When he engenders this gold within himself, it grows and turns into Mahadeva Rudra, as if the reborn form of the Vratya who spurred Prajapati to engender the gold. As in the other versions where Prajapati copulates with his daughter, the Rudra born into the world is the outcome of this, and so we can see that Prajapati engendering the gold within himself is the same as Prajapati copulating with his own female aspect in the other versions. But also clear in this version is the fact that the Vratya is the one who had compelled this engendering of Prajapati's gold, has been the catalyst of this shrouded fertilization of Prajapati's inner feminine aspect. Quote, "There was a roaming Vratya. He roused Prajapati to action. Prajapati beheld gold in himself and engendered it. That became unique. That became distinguished. That became great. That became excellent. That became devotion. That became holy fervor. That became truth. Through that, he was born. He grew. He became great. He became Mahadeva. He gained the lordship of the gods. He became Lord. He became Chief Vratya. He held a bow, even that bow of Indra. His belly is dark blue. His back is red." Unquote. The next key to understanding this picture is the fact that this violation of the daughter is actually a myth that occurs on two levels. This has to be understood. There are two separate Vedic myths with the same basic pattern, but with a different father god as the violator of the goddess. The goddess sometimes being the daughter explicitly, and other times modulating to a more vague or different relation. On the higher level is Prajapati, the transcendent father god and creator, god of generation and totality. But then nearly the same thing is done by Dyaush, aka Div, father sky or father heaven, and this is even the version of the pattern known in the Rig Veda. See hymns 1.71 and 10.61. In these hymns, Father Heaven, Div or Dyaush, not Prajapati, copulates with his daughter, is shot by Rudra Agni while in the act, but the offspring therefrom are the fire priests or fire youths known as the Angirases, primordial priests who are ancestors of humans. Not Manu or Rudra Mahadeva, who would be the scion of Prajapati in his myth. This is thus a different event at a lower level than the Prajapati myth, yet it is a near echo, easily confused and conflated with it. We cannot just assume it is the exact same myth, though, merely having switched the gods over time or something, because evidence from other branches suggests that both of these mirrored events have their own roles within the theology. They have their own purpose, and that both versions must have existed as separate mythic events in the earliest PIE mythology, because we see them as separate myths in multiple different branches. We see this picture more clearly even in the Iranic creation myth of the Bundahishin, but only if we have interpreted the figures correctly there. Ahura Mazda, as I've shown, is actually the Prajapati type, not primarily the Varuna type, as sometimes believed, while Gaiomard indeed descends from the Dyaush or Dyava Prithvi, that is, sky-earth, type. As we see his recognized legendary form, Kaiomars, crying bloody tears for his dead son. A dead giveaway, as this is a common father sky motif. The bloody tears of the sky god, often for his son, found in various forms with Bhishma, Zeus, and the Dagda. What is interesting in the Iranic tradition is that Ahura Mazda has procreative relations with his female creation, Spandar-Mad, who here is the female earth divinity. It is even emphasized in the texts that this is a sacred incestuous act, archetype of the sacred incestuous marriage of Iranic texts. Spandar-Mad being Ahura Mazda's creation, this act of procreation with her is clearly the match of Prajapati, incestuously violating his own daughter or female aspect to spark the creation of the cosmos, and this is made clear by the explanation within the texts. Quote, "Now the earth, Spandar-Mad, from which all creation has originated, is considered as his, Ahura Mazda's, mate. Out of her he created Gaiomard," unquote, says the Denkard, Book 3, Section 80. The text then calls this union, quote, "the Queto Das of father and daughter," unquote, the name of the sacred incestuous marriage, which indicates the power that this creation myth exercised even on marriage customs, and the fact that this union of Ahura Mazda and Spandar-Mad was definitely seen as father and daughter incest, but with a sacred dimension. But immediately after this event of the Prajapati type and his incestuous relation with his daughter, Gaiomard is attacked by Ahriman, who, as I've shown, is the demonized Rudra, with Gaiomard being the father sky descended type. And Gaiomard's seed then falls into the earth, who is Spandar-Mad, his mother here, and thus also another incestuous relation immediately echoing that of Ahura Mazda with Spandar-Mad, and happening right after. Quote, "It is made known in the religion that when Gaiomard died, his semen fell into the earth, Spandar-Mad, which was his mother, and through that connection, Mashya and Mashyani were born," unquote. Also from the Denkard, same section. Mashya and Mashyani are then the ancestors of humans. Just as when Dyaush's seed falls into earth when he's attacked by Rudra, what springs from it are the Angirasas, the ancestors of humans. It is the parallel myth. Thus, one after the other, Ahura Mazda, the Prajapati, and Gaiomard, the figure derived by modification from Father Sky, have progenitive relations with the same feminine divinity, and they both are attacked by Ahriman, the Rudra, in connection to this set of events. From Gaiomard's emission arise the ancestors of humans, as also with Dyaush's case. So here we see much more plainly the two levels of the violation of the female aspect, first by the Prajapati and then by the Father Sky type, higher and lower levels of nearly the same myth type, echoing one after the other. The two levels of this myth seem almost blended in the Rig Vedic version of hymns 1.71 and 10.61, where Father Sky, Div, is said in explicit terms to place his spark or his genitive member in his own daughter, but then his seed falls into the earth as well, a sort of conflation or acknowledgement of the two female aspects that are at play, the daughter and the earth, who overlap and yet have different roles in this Vedic version. Father Sky is in a way a god who carries forward an aspect of Prajapati's role in this myth, but within the material and mortal realm, the lower realm. He is the material shell that clothes the high god Prajapati in the world egg, or he is the material shell that is the house made by Tvastar Prajapati. In other versions, see my Father Sky video for more information. In the Greek case, these events are also seen to be distinct. When the cosmic egg is split open to make the cosmos, it is comparable to Prajapati engendering the gold that was within himself and giving rise to Rudra from himself, since he is the golden embryo within the Vedic cosmic egg. He is Hiranyagarbha. The Orphics seem to disagree about whether protogonos or eros emerges from the egg and thus is the golden embryo, which is understandable since the Vedic Prajapati is the golden embryo, but his kama or seed is what spurts forth from the broken totality, alike to emerging from the broken egg. Then when Uranos is castrated by Cronus while violating Gaia, Mother Earth, in the standard Hesiodic version, and his blood and semen fall and give rise to the ancestors of humans, the Melii, this is the lower level of this basic myth type. Once again, Gaia, Earth, is again Mother of Sky here, as with Spandarmad and Gaiomard. In short, we have to both differentiate these two levels of this myth type, but also recognize that they are two versions of almost the same myth occurring first on the level of the transcendent pre-cosmic Godhead and then on the level of the material, now created world. Some elements between them intertwine or are conflated in different versions. They are presented differently, yet they seem to have been essentially separate and with their own important roles that are mainly consistent across branches, and thus in the Proto-Indo-European mythology. This is helpful for us because another principle is made a bit more clear in the lower Dyaush or Father Sky version of this myth, as seen in the Rig Veda. It is Agni who has prepared the fiery seed for Dyaush, and thus has inflamed the passion of Dyaush for his own daughter. See hymn 1.71, verses 5 and onward. In a sense, Dyaush is a passive locus of the passion that Agni inflames and even embodies, and not only this, but Agni is Rudra, as we are told again and again in the texts. So we get the paradox again of Agni Rudra, who is not subtly called the archer in these Rigvedic verses, inflaming the passion that he then avenges and tries to stop violently. As Stella Cromrish says, discussing this myth, quote, "Rudra is Agni, the fire that heats the first passion in the cosmos and turns upon itself, burning to consume its action, avenging itself on itself. Father Heaven is only the locus of its consuming intensity." Unquote. We have discussed the identity of Rudra Agni extensively in other videos, and Cromrish's book, The Presence of Shiva, is emphatically recommended on this topic. So in the lower Dyaush type, Father Heaven type of the myth, Agni, the fire god, whose essence on this level is Rudra, prepares the fire seed for Dyaush and inflames his passion. Dyaush violates his daughter, and then Rudra Agni shoots him with his arrow. In the Vratya and Prajapati story, the Vratya makes Prajapati find the gold in himself, thereby procreating out of his own female aspect to engender Rudra Mahadeva. In the other variants of Prajapati's copulation with his daughter, Rudra also avenges the act of procreation by shooting Prajapati in the act. So in both higher and lower versions, we begin to see the consistent pattern that actually a form of Rudra, or specifically a Rudra Agni, if Agni is Rudra esoterically on the highest level, is the catalyst of the procreative act, while the father, Prajapati or Dyaus, is, as Crommersh says, only the locus of this fiery passion that is really working through him while he is more or less passive, or at best reactive to this fiery passion. Even more, if the seed that Dyaus emits is actually Agni Soma, fire seed, which has been prepared by Agni or Rudra Agni, then even the seed within that engenders the offspring is really Agni as well. And Rudra is the essence of Agni. Quote, "The Vratya stirred him toward the act of generation. As an ascetic, the Vratya had magic power and acted not unlike Agni, the fire, who had prepared the seed for the father. Like Rudra Agni, who had prepared the seed for the father, the Vratya caused great commotion within the progenitor or Prajapati. It made him shed the immortal substance, the semen or gold. The semen is the immortal seed of creation out of the uncreate." Unquote. Quote, "The formidable guardian of the Absolute played an ambiguous, inevitable role. As guardian of the substance of immortality, he entrusted the seed of creation and readied it for the Father, and too late attempted to prevent its fall to earth. The involvement of Rudra and Prajapati is frightening. A straight line leads from the preparation of the seed by Rudra Agni to its being shed by the Father and to the God's creation of Vastoshpati. This line is crossed by the flight of an arrow. The point of intersection lies in the Father. Rudra carries the action and responsibility as carrier of the fire seed on the one hand and as archer and guardian of the uncreate on the other. Prajapati is his target and victim." Unquote. Quote, "The wild hunter is Rudra, the raging flame, lashing out, letting the arrow fly at the critical moment. Yet he neither prevented nor did he undo the act of the Father. Only in part did he frustrate it. Or was he himself part of it? Rudra is Agni, the fire flames in him." Unquote. Quote, "Rudra, the archer, the avenger, arose at the violation of pre-existential wholeness that he failed to prevent, having ambivalently even provoked that violation. Now, irreversibly within creation, the integrity that was before the beginning had been ruptured." Unquote. Quote, "He is Rudra, the avenger of the rupture of the Absolute, but he is also Rudra Agni, who himself has caused that rupture by having prepared the seed for the Father. The seed fell when Rudra threatened to let fly the arrow, lashing out against the Father, the Lord of generation, who made Rudra Lord of animals, Pashupati. Creation was flawed from the start, yet was redeemed at the same time by the intervention of the gods, who out of the substance and rhythm of their magic words fashioned Vastoshpati. In that poem, Rudra, the fierce god, the guardian of the uncreate, arose himself as the protector of sacred order." Unquote. So Agni is the fire and passion. He is the one really acting in the violation of the daughter by the father. To bring this together, we must point to the fact that Koul is directly called a Re-Fenid. Not only is he a Fianna man, he is a Fianna king, Re, so to speak, the highest embodiment and leader of the Fianna. Because, as Chris Kershaw has shown, the Fianna parallel the Vratyas. Koul, the Fianna king, then perfectly parallels the wandering Vratya, who here represents all Vratyas, and who comes to Prajapati in order to catalyze the engendering of the gold that is sitting untapped within him. This is precisely what Koul does with Tadg. Muirne is the daughter, the feminine aspect of the Father God. Thus, the gold within that Father God is the germ of creation that can only be reached through her. Koul forcibly takes her against the ordinance of Tadg and Nueva. This forcible breaking of the ordinance in order to ultimately impregnate the daughter then takes the place of the father violating the daughter. Yet now we can see that it is carrying the same meaning, but perhaps even more precisely. This Irish version puts the emphasis on the Rudra-Agni type in Koul, the Vratya parallel, as the actual acting agent within this sexual violation of the daughter. Whereas this role of Rudra-Agni, aka Vratya, is somewhat obscured in the Vedic variant where Prajapati's guilt is more emphasized, where he explicitly violates his daughter, that inner reality of Rudra-Agni actually carrying out the inflammation of passion and even being the agent of the impregnating fire seed itself, this inner reality is made the focus in the Irish version, where Koul instead takes the role of the explicit agent acting on the daughter directly, while Tadg, the father Prajapati, sits passively by. And it is for this reason that the two versions appear so different outwardly. Yet they tell the same essential story, and each one is as valid as the other in carrying the truth of that story. The other benefit of the Irish version is, of course, that it doesn't have to deal with as offensive a subject as incest, and this alone easily could have motivated the shift in emphasis toward focusing on the Fionn king, Koul, being the agent who comes from outside to impregnate the daughter in this Irish tradition. Yet it is important to emphasize this is not an incorrect or muddled variation of the story either, since this is the esoteric core of what is happening, even in the differently appearing Vedic version or versions. Therefore, the quote-unquote change in the Irish version need not have been motivated solely by care for propriety. The crucial thing is to understand that, esoterically speaking, as the daughter of Prajapati, the god who is the totality, is necessarily a part of him, the daughter of Tadg is also part of Tadg. For at this level, the division of the unity has not yet taken place, despite how the story is told with separate divine actors. In fact, the division of the primordial unity is the theme and outcome of this story. But then also the Vratya must be within Prajapati, since before the emission of Prajapati, the pre-cosmic state is unbroken and undivided, and this includes the Vratya, at least on some level. Equally so, the fire of Agni, whose luminous essence is Rudra, is also within Dyaosh, working through him and preparing the vital sap and the fire of passion within him, inflaming him as his very passion and vital spark. Thus, even while Muirne is an aspect of her father, Tadg, so Koul also, in this highly esoteric tale, must ultimately be seen as within, quote-unquote, Tadg as well, or they overlap and inhabit an undivided state of sorts, where they are aspects and faces of one Godhead or divine flame that leaps out and reacts upon itself. Because this can't be fully understood by human minds, it is narrated as separate divine figures, even as a quaint medieval Irish romance. Yet it is more like an eternal pattern that doesn't unfold in time and space, but gives rise to them by the splitting apart that the paradoxical pattern causes. Even so, as soon as Koul takes Muirne, Gaul is sent to attack him, and Gaul kills Koul. Gaul, as we have seen already, is the terrifying face of the Rudra type, even as he plays this role more obviously in relation to Fionn, the Rudra of the world. But when Koul's men later see the grown-up Fionn for the first time in the untranslated Scottish traditions, They mutter to one another that Fionn looks identical to his father Koul. They almost think Koul has come back to them in this young man. Indeed, as the Vratya who catalyzes the gold within Prajapati effectively causes himself to be reborn thereby as Rudra Mahadeva, so likewise Koul is effectively reborn as his own son Fionn, who eventually takes over his father's role of Fianna King. The patterns are identical at this point. Thus, we really have to get accustomed to what is actually going on here, even though it is difficult to grasp at first, and even hard to believe. Koul, Gaul, and Fionn are three phases of one and the same Rudra-type god. When Koul acts as the agent to impregnate the daughter of Tadg, acting here as the Vratya or inflaming Rudra Agni, then right on cue, Gaul turns and attempts to attack the act of procreation, which is centered in Koul, and put a stop to or avenge it. Thus he attacks directly at Koul and kills him, since in this version, Koul is the one carrying out the act, instead of the father, aka Prajapati type, as in the Vedic version. This sequence of acts, from Koul to Gaul, is Rudra Agni catalyzing the sexual procreative event with the daughter, and then turning his other face to violently react against it. Exactly the same paradoxical pattern that we find in the Prajapati violation myth and echoed in the Dyaush myth. Details of both Koul and Gaul even suggest their Rudra Agni emphasis. They are both Fianna kings, making them forms of the chief Rudra type, yet Gaul's birth name is actually Aidh, meaning fire. Plainly, he is a very Agni-centric Rudra, Aidh or fire, who is also the one-eyed one, which is what Gaul means. But Koul, as well, has a possible Agni marker in his origins. His father is named Trenver, meaning strong man, man of strength. This is curious because Agni's oft-repeated epithet in the Vedas is son of strength, while Koul is son of man of strength. Whether this is coincidence or not, Koul certainly acts in the inflaming Vratya role. From the impregnated daughter Muirne is born the Rudra of the world, Jevnya, who grows up to be renamed Fionn mac Koul. Exactly as Rudra Mahadeva, sometimes born as Kumara first, is the outcome of these Prajapati myths in the various Vedic versions. In some versions of Fionn's myth, he also has to run away to the wilderness as a baby. In the Vratya myth, the text does repeat how the newborn Mahadeva goes away to all the directions, in succession, as if ever trekking the wilds and compassing the bounds of existence. But even more conclusively, the stories end in precisely the same way. Jevnya, when he is strong enough, returns to the Axis Mundi fortress of Tadg and Nuada, the sacred hill of Alvu, and demands it from Tadg, his grandfather. Tadg, fearing Fionn's power, relinquishes it to him, and it becomes Fionn's domain. In the Vedic versions, the newborn Rudra always turns upon his father, crying and demanding from him to give him names. But these names are dominions of the cosmos, so that by the end of giving him all the 9 names, the fearful Prajapati has given over the totality of existence to the young and terrible Rudra, Bhava or existence being one of these names, making Rudra the ruler of existence and its embodiment going forward. Thus, the birth of Rudra and Jevnya/Fionn and their demanding their birthright compensation from the Father God is more or less exactly the same, and they each take over the very axis of existence, the axis mundi, from these fathers, who then recede somewhat to give way to the new Lord of the cosmos. These details make it clear that we are dealing with myths from the same root originally, a correct and true match despite outward differences. These outward differences, as we have shown, can also be understood and harmonized when one understands the esoteric levels of the myth and the components involved. Indeed, the very fact that this version of the myth type was able to survive in the Irish version tells us that the original Proto-Indo-European version of the myth already symbolized a situation where the gods involved are actually overlapping in an undifferentiated state, as described. This esoteric situation of symbolic undifferentiatedness had to have been the foundation of the story at that early time for this Irish version of the story to have developed from the shared root with the Vedic version. We can see them both splitting off from this one shared concept and having connections still to it, only being interpretable by it. You could only get the Vratya type Koul as the acting agent of this myth if this developed from an esoteric understanding that he is the fire of passion, more or less within the Prajapati type, who is Tadg, and you only would get Gaul attacking the act of passion if he was originally understood as another face of the same Rudra-type god who inflamed and carried the passion. The paradoxes of this myth are the entire motivating structure for why these events happen at all, why this story even exists, and has the details in it that it does. Let me repeat that. The paradoxes of this myth are the entire motivating structure for why these events happen at all. They could not have developed accidentally in these two directions, the Irish and the Vedic, from a story lacking this esoteric core that unites their meanings. It seems clear that what was an esoteric myth has been adapted to an adventurous romance form in the Irish case, where all the figures are separate as well as being humanized, and this allowed for Koul to take the role of agent while being outwardly separate from the father who carries out the sexual act with the daughter of that father. The Welsh version of this myth type supports this idea that originally these gods did indeed stand-like aspects within more of an unbroken unity, with the violation of the daughter being that which breaks the unity and begins creative differentiation in time and space. To locate this Welsh myth, we should begin by finding the Welsh parallel of Fionn and the story of his birth. One would be correct to assume this is usually Gwyn ap Nudd. However, there is no birth myth of Gwyn. Nonetheless, since we have decoded the Welsh creation myth in the Mabinogi, we can see that Efnisien and Nisien from the second branch are in fact the two sides of the Rudra-Siva type, the destroyer and the peacebringer, with their half-sibling Manawyddan as the Agni aspect, the fire god of this triple deity. See my book or previous videos on the Celtic Creation Myth for more on these points. We can test the case to see if Efnisien and Nisien's father could be like Koul, a higher form of the Rudra type who fathers the Rudra-Siva of the world, Fionn able to stand for Rudra-Siva combined in his myth, while Efnisien and Nisien stand for the two sides treated separately. Elsewhere, as in the Book of Invasions, Avarian stands for the Shiva side, opposed to Aver Finn, but Fionn mac Coul can stand for both. Efnisien and Nisien's father is Iroswyth, with a name apparently meaning gold enemy. He is famous as the one who imprisons Llŷr, the god of the sea, or rather the divine sea itself, since Llŷr simply means sea, and Iroswyth takes the imprisoned Llŷr's wife, Penarddun, to have Efnisien and Nisien with her. Because of the imprisoning of waters theme here, I had originally thought Iroswyth might be like Vritra, the serpent enemy of the Vedic texts who encloses the waters and is defeated by Indra, especially since gold enemy sounds like a dragon name, dragons being hoarders of gold in folklore. But as we have discussed in our Serpent Rudra myth stream, believe it or not, Rudra overlaps with the serpent enemies in a real but esoteric manner, Vratya apparently even becoming the serpent of the deep, Ahi Budnya, when he falls down into the deeps, and Ahir Budnya being an attested name of Rudra. Furthermore, a figure named the Mountain, a distinct deity who is nonetheless also esoterically connected with Shiva in some contexts, also is a closer off of the heavenly regions of light, similar to the actions of the serpents Vala or Vratya. Stella Cromrish compares the role of the mountain to how Rudra is the one who holds back the divine liquid of the pre-cosmic unity or the uncreate, as the guardian of its integrity. This role of guardian of the liquid of the uncreate, who tries to hold it back as if imprisoning it, is absolutely paramount to Rudra, and we can see how it echoes similarly in the mountain as encloser. Understanding how these myths of enclosing divine waters and light intertwine and echo the role of Rudra may help us to understand Aeroswith, who imprisons the sea. Quote, "The mountain enclosed the world and closed off the infinite regions of light in the beyond above its impenetrable extent." Cf. Rigveda 2.23.18, 5.56.4, and 5.60.3. The region of the sun before it ever shone on earth. When Indra cleft the mountain, the light of heaven flowed down to earth. Cf. Rigveda 1.32.1 through 4, 6.30.3 through 5, and 10.89.7. Parvata, the mountain, keeping the light of heaven imprisoned, had been its guardian. In this respect, Parvata, though inactive, was akin to Rudra, the archer, and to Krishanu, who, by their actions, intended to keep in its integrity the state ante principium, before creation. In the myth of Indra, which pervades the Rig Veda, the uncreate was a pleroma of light closed off by the mountain, and Indra brought it to the world. The pleroma of the uncreate held the elixir and essence of life, soma, the elixir of life, and semen, the seed of life. Vratya, the serpent, had lain coiled around the cosmic mountain. Vratya was killed by Indra and fell to the bottom, into the abyss, when Indra shattered the mountain and released the streams to flow to the sea and freed the sun to shine in this world. But Indra's first act of creation was not yet complete, for the sun became engulfed in darkness in the cave at rock bottom, whence it had to be liberated and let out, to rise in the spring of the world. Parvata, the mountain, was the rock bottom in the depths as well as the dome on high, the firmament, the sky that had kept imprisoned the light and waters of life. In the creation myth of Indra, the figures of the mountain and of Vratya, the serpent, coiled around it, correspond to those of Rudra and Krishanu, the archers. The mountain was cleft, dead Vratya fell to its bottom, becoming Ahi Budnya, the serpent of the deep. Note, this is a name of Rudra. The shining rivers of light and life flowed down from heaven to the earth, and their waters filled the ocean. Unquote. Quote, Krishanu, the Gandharva, had meant to prevent the descent of Soma to gods and man from within the plenum whence a falcon had stolen it. The other archer, Rudra, the wild god, had meant to prevent an outflow of semen from that very plenum into creation. Neither succeeded, but while Krishanu, the archer, is not remembered except for his defense as guardian of Soma, and for his defiance of the cosmos as it was meant to be, partaking in exalted moments of the plenum that was and is before creation, Rudra the archer renews his assault on the creator from eon to eon. In addition to Rudra, the god Krishanu, the Gandharva, both archers, the nameless, formless plenum had a third formidable guardian, He was not an archer. He was Vritra, the cosmic serpent. Vritra moved coiling around the as-yet unmanifest cosmos. The serpent kept its rivers enclosed and thereby prevented their flowing down to earth. These three guardians of the uncreate, containing the life-giving moisture irradiated by a light unrevealed, failed in their mission." Unquote. And quote, "Like Vritra, the serpent, Rudra and Krishanu, too, failed to keep in its integrity the state ante principium before creation. Their arrows could not arrest the flowing to earth of Soma, the elixir of life, and the semen that Prajapati shed into creation. They had been in the uncreate, described as a region of ineffable light that Parvata and Vritra had held unspent. The pre-cosmic power of the mountain had to yield the streams of flowing light, of which the celestial Ganga, who was also called Kutila, became the mythical image. The bond that was to be forged between Shiva and Parvati links the mountain, a figure of the pre-cosmic state as imaged in the myth of Indra, with the cosmic presence of Shiva." Unquote. From Cromrish, The Presence of Shiva. And see also, quote, "Shiva caught the turbulent Ganga like a garland of pearls on his forehead." Unquote. From the Mahabharata 3.108.9. So this is a sort of echo of Rudra-Siva's role of imprisoner of divine waters, and shows the importance of this role in his mythos. Rudra-Siva's role of guardian and so imprisoner of the liquid of the uncreate, the primordial ocean or pleroma, is why he attacks Prajapati. Prajapati is in a sexual act with his own female aspect, and the eruption of passion and divine semen threatens to release the sacred liquid from the uncreate, breaking its unity and beginning time and generation. This guardian role, then, is also what Gaul Muirne is doing, esoterically speaking, when he attacks Koul for spending the sacred semen by impregnating Muirne and beginning the cycle of generation that will lead to the displacement of Tadg and possibly Nuada from the sacred center. It could also be said that Nuada, as the one who wants to keep the daughter away from Koul, could also be playing this role of protecting the outflow of the sacred liquid and the stability of the unity. Gaul here is the avenger or defender of the sacred liquid of the absolute in this myth. This Rudra role is concerned with keeping the sacred liquid within its bounds, though he fails, because his other face sparks and carries through the act of procreation, that being Koul. It is significant that the unbroken uncreate, the site of unity before division, the mythic representation of the absolute as our minds try to grasp it, is often symbolized by the primordial ocean of liquid and light, just as much as by the tower or pillar. Indeed, ocean and pillar are like two sides of one coin in a sense, as symbols of the absolute, with fire being another symbol when a different aspect of the absolute is being gestured at. The Egyptian absolute or one, for instance, is typically seen as the noon itself, the undifferentiated pre-cosmic waters, or ocean, or as the lord of the Jed pillar, Ptah, when he is unified with noon as Ptah noon, or another permutation of these. Ocean and pillar. Cromrish also describes the Vedic uncreate and the sacred liquid that characterizes it in terms exactly matching what we find with the Egyptian noon for those familiar. Quote, "The intercourse of the Creator with his daughter is the two-faced symbol of the rupture of pre-existential wholeness and of the descent to earth of its immortal substance, the seed of life. This portentous act at the dawn of the world, before the beginning of man's life on earth, is the infringement of the uncreate and pre-existential wholeness, a spurt from self-contained fullness, the loss of integrity of the absolute. The state before creation is beyond the polarity of opposites. It is as vast as chaos, but having no qualities whatsoever, it lacks disorder. It is known in later Indian mystical realization as Brahman. It is realized through samadhi, at-one-ment, as moksha, release, nirvana, extinction of the flame of life, shunyata, emptiness. These names apply to an inner realization of that state beyond the last frontiers of thought. Cf. Rigveda 10.5.6 through 7. The archer whose arrow hits the father at the very moment when the father is spending himself into creation acts as avenging consciousness and guardian of the uncreate in defense of its integrity. The arrow and the shot of the archer are decisive symbols in the myth, though they were only partly effectual in the course of its events. Indeed, the arrow hit just a fraction of a moment too late, meant to prevent the act, the flowing of the seed. The shot failed to prevent its consequences." Unquote. From Cromrish, The Presence of Shiva. And important here is the fact, as I've suggested in another video, that the god genealogy found in the Book of Invasions, when we remove the more obviously fabricated generations that fill the space between Adam and the real and attested Irish gods like Indhui and Nate, who have actual narratives mentioned about them, this genealogy seems to begin with a figure named Tavarn, parent of Tat, who is parent of Aldhui, then Indhui. Tat seems plausibly to be an archaic word meaning dad or father, perhaps a father deity then, just above Aldhui and Indhui, while Tavarn is a poetic term found in glossaries meaning ocean. We must conclude then that we have here a tradition showing a cosmic ocean actually preceding the first father god, Tat, and coming immediately before all of the other known gods, such as Indhui. Given all the surrounding context and the position of this myth very early on in the genealogy, I would posit that Llyr, the Welsh name meaning ocean, is in a comparable position to the pre-cosmic Tavarn, ocean, as well as to the Egyptian Nun, and the ocean of undifferentiated divine liquid that constitutes the Vedic uncreate as well. We are dealing with the daughter of Beli here in the Welsh myth, and Beli is Bila is Prajapati, as shown previously, so this can still be the ocean of the undifferentiated plenum at a level just before division. Rudra is paradigmatically the guardian of this ocean of liquid, and as esoterically continuous with Vritra, or at least prefiguring him on a higher level, the serpent aspect of Rudra acts like a jealous imprisoner of this ocean. As Shiva imprisons the river Ganges in his hair in the other myth, so Rudra-Siva pre-cosmically holds back the undifferentiated ocean of sacred liquid before anything else has developed. Yet Rudra Agni himself sparks the passion that breaks the unity by spilling this sacred liquid into generation with the daughter of Prajapati. And this act generates Rudra's own reborn worldly self, Rudra Mahadeva, aka Kumara. With all these pieces in place, we can see now that this is most likely precisely what Aeroswith is doing in his myth. Firstly, because his children with Penardhun are Efnisien and Nisien, the very Rudra and Shiva types who are on the same level of manifestation as Fionn Koul and Rudra Mahadeva. If this is the birth of the Rudra-Siva, then there's a good chance it parallels the others of this type somehow. But also because Penardhun herself is indeed the daughter of the apparent Welsh Prajapati, Beli Mar. And this fact should really put the interpretation on strong footing. Beli Mar is the likely Prajapati because of his own genealogical position, as well as his interchangeability with the Irish Prajapati, Bila, who has more extensive mythology showing him to be in the Prajapati position. Beli is in the exact right spot in the genealogies then, as son of Dunwell Moilmood, the silent Brahman figure, and the name Bila and Beli are interchanged in some attestations. In our myth in question, in perfect position once again, Beli's daughter is the one taken forcefully away and impregnated with the lower Rudra and Shiva. This can't be missed. This is a case where the pieces of the puzzle mutually reinforce and every detail finally falls into place. So Aeroswith's story does seem to fit as a variation on Koul's, despite different presentations. They both are the higher Rudra, Aeroswith and Koul, except Aeroswith simply combines the two aspects of Rudra, Koul and Gaul, of the Irish story, in one figure who acts paradoxically by himself, first imprisoning the heavenly ocean, but also impregnating the daughter of the Prajapati with the divine seed to bring forth the Rudra-Siva pair. The pre-cosmic role of the divine ocean has also simply been emphasized more in this version, leading to the coded drama we see, with first the imprisonment and then the connected abduction of the contested daughter. But once again, remember that Nuada features in the Irish version. Just as Koul fits this parallel far better than he fits with the Manu/Kama parallel that we find in the Sons of Mill variant, so likewise Aeroswith does not seem to fit Manu/Kama, who in other variants is the step between Prajapati and Rudra. I have shown that in the birth of Eivor Fionn, as opposed to Fionn mac Koul, Eivor Finn's father, Gaulav, aka Mil Espana, is not Prajapati. Gaulav is not Prajapati and is not a higher Rudra, but he is this intermediate figure of the Manu/Kama type, the deified overflowing passion of the Father God. But no Manu/Kama appears in the Koul or Aeroswith stories. The simple reason is that Manu/Kama is the embodied fury or passion of Prajapati, which then transforms directly into Rudra, but only in some versions where this aspect is being focused on. In the Rig Veda creation hymn, Kama is the very semen that Prajapati as the golden embryo emits. The semen of the gods, who are aspects of Prajapati, also mixes in a bowl, and this becomes Rudra in yet another variant. Multiple variants take different angles on the birth of Rudra, and so tell seemingly contradictory stories in order to emphasize a different part of the process. So clearly, Manu/Kama as the overflow of fury or of passion, or even the semen that then turns into Rudra, is a figure that only some versions choose to embody as a god in his own right in the telling. He can drop out of the narrative as personified deity, or he can be emphasized as the god of passion, etc. What is so fascinating is that the Vedic tradition has so many variant versions of Prajapati's passionate overflow and the birth of Rudra, and each one can emphasize a different aspect of the process and can tell an entirely different but self-coherent story to get across what it seeks to get across. And what is even more fascinating is that we seem to have this very same tradition of variation in the Irish version, and along the very same lines. Eivor Fionn and Fionn mac Koul do not actually represent different levels of the same god, but instead they should be seen on the same level for the most part. They should be the very same god, especially in their births, as the grandson of the Prajapatis, Bila and Tadg, making them both the Rudra of the world. Yet these versions are undeniably telling different stories. Eivor Fionn is son of a Manu type, Mil aka Gaulav, as I have shown the etymology of Gaulav supports, matching exactly with that of Manu. Fionn, on the other hand, is directly the son of a higher Rudra type, the Vratya type. As stories, they also seem to contradict on many things, yet if the larger picture is understood esoterically, they can now be harmonized. They are each telling parts of one larger story, but from different angles. Each version has a purpose unto itself and is trying to get across one dimension of the complex divine genealogy, the set of mythical events that must be narrated. Yet the stories do not actually have any durable contradiction. Gaul is always there, so to speak, as the fury or passion of the father, whether that is Bila or Tadg, with this fury or passion being what develops into Fionn mac Koul. This fury or passion just may or may not be personified and focused on. He doesn't have to take on a name and a distinct role in the genealogy, yet he can, if that is the story being told in another tradition. Both are true simultaneously. This is what the mystical tradition of Indo-European divine storytelling was apparently capable of, an incredible flexibility of mind that we can now see went all the way back. And what is most fascinating of all is that the variants we have here in the Irish version are exactly along the same lines as those found in the Vedic tradition. One version has a Manu type in Gaul, giving rise to the lower Rudra, Fionn, just as this is a prominent version of Rudra's birth in the Brahmanas. Manu as son of Prajapati, Prajapati cries upon him and he gives rise to Rudra. And then the other version has the Rudra Fionn mac Koul, born as the son of the daughter of the Prajapati, Tadg, when the higher Rudra Agni or Vratya forcefully instigates the act of procreation with her, and the Prajapati Tadg standing by passively, this pattern too being another of the most famous variations found in the Vedas and Brahmanas, with the Vratya instigating Prajapati's self-procreation, or Prajapati inflamed by the active inner Rudra fire violating his daughter. The fact that we have roughly the same two types of variants along the same lines, that is, in the two Irish stories, suggests that a general tradition of variation was not only present during Proto-Indo-European times, but that these two forms of this birth story probably already existed side by side in the tradition even at that time. This suggests that these variations were never seen as contradictory, but as each necessary, and as tools of mystical enlightenment used by the sages to illuminate different angles of the creation myth and birth of the central Rudra-type god. This suggests an incredibly robust mystical narrative tradition at this time, capable of containing and perfectly comfortable with continuing outwardly contradictory stories to give a more well-rounded picture of the story of the gods. This reveals the sophistication of the original Proto-Indo-European tradition. The deepest correspondences aren't always the obvious ones. They're the structural patterns that can manifest through transformations. Here is your Celtic primordial creative outburst myth, a key piece of the extensive creation myth material we have of the Celts, and once again a miracle of careful preservation. The basis of Tadg's identification with Prajapati is that he is called Tadg of the Towers in the Battle of Cumhaill, and is lord of the sacred mound of Alvu. Prajapati is specifically the sacred mound god, and of the towers should also refer to an axis mundi god such as Brahman, Prajapati, or Rudra. Tadg's mythic role with regard to his daughter as the focal point of forces taking and impregnating her, and this resulting in the younger Rudra, who then returns to take the dominion from him, only confirms the identity of this emphatic axis mundi figure. Please check out my Patreon if you would like to support the channel and see all of the important topics I have in mind get made into videos, as well as supporting the completion of my second book, Briochan's Tower, in which many mysteries will be solved. My book, Taliesin's Map, is available from Amazon. Link in the description.